All right. Hello and welcome everyone. So, with the Gauss Prime video done and already out, let's talk about the Gauss Prime weapons that we're getting this Prime access, which we're going to be starting with the Acceltra Prime and then talking about the Akarius Prime. For that, just to preface this whole thing, I think that both of these weapons are actually very good. They are a bit high MR for my taste, but they are very good weapons. However, they do not compare favorably with the really, really powerful Incarnate weapons. So, if you were wanting these weapons to be equivalent to, the hardest weapons to get in the game, they're not that, but they are very, very good. For that, talking about the Acceltra to start here, the build is going to be pretty standard. This is what we're working with here. We are obviously not going for anything besides viral because we are a Hunter Munitions build, and Hunter Munitions is how we're going to be getting through most enemies. For that, a very important note is that we are using Hammer Shot, which is not super frequently used, but has been getting more use recently. And the reason for that is because this weapon has a ton of crit chance. We're at 102 crit chance, and once you are at that 100% consistency for your critical chance, or even really 98, 99 as well, Hammer Shot performs pretty much identically to a dual stat elemental, except critical damage applies the damage increase to slash procs. So this is going to be much more effective just in terms of making our slash procs deal much more damage, which of course ignores armor, and then actually kills higher level enemies. In addition to that, we are using Firestorm. The Acceltra Prime does have an increased blast radius over its regular variant, and Prime Firestorm just exacerbates that and lets us kill a lot more enemies. Obviously, if you are having troubles getting the enemies to, die, especially at the start of your Merciless stacks, you could swap out a Primed Firestorm with Serration. And I will say, if you do not have Primed Firestorm, you probably should do that no matter what, as the radius increase, especially after, the nerfs that we got for these AoE mods, is really only worth it on the primed variation of the mods at this point, I would say. For that, though, otherwise this build is pretty standard. We are on Vigilante supplies. This is going to give us the 5% chance to enhance the critical hits, which, of course, every single hit we do is a crit. So that's going to be very, it's actually more damage increase than you would actually think it would be. But this is, of course, converts secondary ammo pickups to 30% of ammo pickup, whereas if we were using the primed rifle ammo mutation, we would get 92% of an ammo pickup. For that, you can use the primed on here if you don't really care about that 5% enhanced critical hits. It is like a tiny damage loss really overall. And if you're having a lot of trouble keeping the ammo up, which you kind of will, depending on what level content you're playing in, you could, of course, just swap this in for the primed rifle ammo mutation if you happen to have it. Overall, though, this is pretty usual stuff that we can show real quick against some enemies. Now, for our tests, I am going to be showing our older mixed squad of units. This can contain some weaker units like crewmen and lancers and butchers, and then also has our heavier units, the heavy gunners, the bombards, the ancients, which shows a nice good spread of resistances, and these are going to be at Steel Path level 200. So it is unlikely in general that you're really going to be fighting enemies that are this tough, but this is not the Incarnate squad that I usually show off, which is usually just a raw, gigantic EHP test of 20 corrupted heavy gunners. And the Acceltra has a big problem with doing that test, which we will show in a bit, because it is just not really strong enough to get through that kind of level of EHP, and it especially can't build up through that kind of strength. But usually, you're not going to be seeing a huge density of enemies as tough as the corrupted heavy gunners. At level 200, of course, until you are well deeper into Steel Path, where most people aren't going to go, or you're at the very least going to bring an armor strip or a buff. But at the level 200 test, it performs pretty reasonably well. I will say you do still need to get in there and get your ammo from the enemies that you are killing at this level, but it is not undoable. Also, the Acceltra Prime has a bit of a lower fire rate than its regular variant, but the much increased damage actually means that is kind of just overall a positive for it. It also helps with overfiring, as that could be a big problem with this, where you're firing way more shots than you need to at any given enemy. So we have just a little bit of cleanup here with our two heavy units. Yeah, and you can see that does a good job of killing them. I actually ended with full ammo, which is pretty lucky on the ammo drops, if I'm honest. But it doesn't kill as fast as, some of the crazy Incarnate weapons that we have, but the fact that it chews through that squad pretty well at all, and is like a pretty wide-reaching AoE weapon, I think is overall pretty good. Moving on, though, let's talk about our other weapon for this Prime Access, which is the Akarius Prime. These, spoiler, I will say, are the much better of the two weapons here in this PA. And these are just the little auto-homing missile launchers. These are built like this. It's notable that I have these on Corrosive Heat, but that is not for the recent reason of using Corrosive, which would be Corrosive Shards. That is just because Corrosive will offer us much better upfront burst damage. I will say, again, if you are bringing a full armor strip, you probably do want to switch this to Viral, as that's going to be more damage on that direct health. But if you're just planning on shooting this at enemies that are armored, probably just slap Corrosive on it instead. And just go Corrosive Heat to, chunk through that just with raw damage, which these weapons are very, very good at. A few notes. For Cascadia Flare, if you do not have Cascadia Flare, just running Merciless is fine, but I think it is definitely going to be worse, and it is, of course, going to be a lower damage number that you're stacking up to. It can be more consistent longer term, though, depending because of the way the stacks fall off. And we are, of course, using Primed Fulmination. Again, if you do not have the primed version of Fulmination, I would really suggest you just use Hornet Strike instead, but the AoE increase I find to be very good. Also, Hornet Strike will really help with the upfront damage, although with Cascadia Flare, you don't really need that. If you are on Merciless, that is another reason to just get the upfront damage with Hornet Strike, so it's easier to build and keep your Merciless stacks as well. But overall, these are just a insanely better version of the Akarius Prime. And we have our usuals. We have our multi-shot, we have our crit mods, elementals, and then, kind of the one flex slot that in this case is Fulmination. And we are, of course, using Prime Pistol Ammo Mutation because we do not have a set bonus of variation to throw into the Excel slot. And this weapon desperately needs an ammo mutation. For both of these weapons, if it hasn't been clear, they have ammo problems, and you could, instead of opening up the Excel slot and putting an ammo mutation in it, just bring Carrier everywhere with you. Though I think a lot of people probably aren't going to want to do that, even though he is, of course, still very good. With that, this performs much, much better on all of the tests you're going to see me do today. It is just simply better. It has the homing, which is, of course, immediately good. And, it just chews through these enemies quite quickly. I think that guy would have died just to the heat procs. But yeah, you can just kind of just fire with impunity, just kill him dead, and it just... in and out, 5-minute adventure, just missiles away. Especially getting like a kind of a better opening volley there. Like the AoE is quite large, hitting all these enemies very easily with the Fulmination. And it can just shred through them. The thing, if you're going to have any problems with the Akarius Prime, it's going to be with ammo. And that is the problem you're going to have with it, of course. But it is very strong. To show the comparison where you can see the big difference more strongly than ever, we are going to actually show the usual Incarnate squad that I am usually testing with, or at least more recently testing with, which is just the 20 Corrupted Heavy Gunners. Now, granted, this is a bit of an unfair comparison because, of course, Cascadia Flare lets you build up on enemies that aren't dying, whereas you cannot do that on the Acceltra. But I think that is just another point of strength in the Akarius' favor. Just it has better tools at its disposal than the Acceltra does. But the point of this weapon is mostly to ignore armor with the slash procs from 100 munitions and all that business. And you can see it is damaging these enemies, but it's clearly less effective than it was. If you are not getting those merciless stacks built up against hard targets like these, it's going to perform very badly. It can't really just, tear through them with a full magazine of slash procs on, a bunch of its hits. You can, get through the enemies, but I fully ran out of ammo before a single one of them went down, which is not great. By comparison, the Akarius Prime has no issues with a group like this. We can just dump in our damage, and it's just going to work. And this is much more similar to what we have gotten a little more used to recently with the Incarnates. And even at the end of that, we ended with a pretty good ammo amount left. So the Akarius are just going to perform better in pretty much all cases. Because the upfront damage, the way that they build the stacks that they use for their base damage, the AoE being larger, the homing shots, it really all just comes together to mean that the Akarius just are the superior of these two weapons. And I could actually see myself using the Akarius maybe over, actually, quite a few Incarnins of, well, the very lowest tier Incarnins, I suppose. Just because they do very significant damage. And if you are doing like a build around specifically with Gauss and you want to use his PA weapons with him, you can take something like Energized Munitions. And with Energized Munitions, I will say the Akarius Prime are very funny. Whenever you give them ammo efficiency, really stupid things happen because, you know, their major issue goes away and you can just fire away in just any direction and have it disappear, which is a very effective. In general, though, I think these weapons are both good. I don't think that the Acceltra, you know, needs to be in Incarnin tier in order to be considered a good weapon. The main issue is that these weapons are both Mastery Rank 14. And at Mastery Rank 14, that is the level that you start getting into the Incarnin weapons, like the Latum, like the Fenmore, and that does make competition a bit more steep for them. But I think regardless, the Akarius can actually keep up relatively reasonably, especially if, you know, you're just getting into the Latum. This and the Latum kind of have opposite use cases for the most part. So I think there's even still a reason to at least go for the Akarius. But the Acceltra is a bit of a harder sell, especially if you're getting into things even like the Boar and Incarnin and such like that. But yeah, both exceedingly good weapons. I'm not going to run through a Steel Path test because that is just basically, hey, I'm going to run out of ammo a bunch, the musical. But you can see the damage levels of these, and, you know, I showed with the various groups and stuff, so I don't feel like for these the Steel Path test is going to be particularly necessary. Just make sure you're probably only bringing one of these two weapons to any given mission and bringing something a little more ammo efficient in one of your other slots. But yeah, both good weapons. I like them. And hopefully we continue to be getting good weapons in the future Prime accesses, because I was a bit worried that, you know, any new Prime weapon was going to have no merit in the face of the Incarnants, but it's good to see that we can still get some relevant weaponry. All right, thanks for watching, everyone, and of course, as usual, thanks very much to the patrons for supporting the channel, especially the $10 patrons: Alex Barnum, Andrew, Angel SBM, Arbiter Daydream, Benuven, Blotomatic, Brandon Coggin, Brutus Salazar, Canolathra, Dylan Dworsky, Thrain, Afon, James Hartshorn, GC4 Science, John Lobdell, Joshua Adams, Luzanth, Bigokel, Minty Ginja, Michta, Nerve, Ramox Sedate, Ruby, Sharp247, Tamrielic Wastelander, The Coupon of Death, Homeworm, Victor Palmer, Waifu Wars Wadded, and Zerafir. And of course, thank you very much to all of the $5 and $2 patrons as well. It is much appreciated, because I've been asked this a lot. I am doing the 2024 Warframe tier list, but I need to get last year's data from whenever DE releases that, which hopefully happens on the January dev stream. But that's what's holding that up, because, you know, that kind of factors into Warframe's getting S ranks or not. But yeah, that's what's going on. And thanks. Thank you, everybody.